Chapter 1. The National Gallery, present day, 4 years since my first time slip. Trafalgar Square is packed with tourists in the autumn sunshine. Live performance artists stand statuesque, hoping Jessica and I will deposit money into their little coin receptacles as they pose. I fumble in my bag to find my purse at the bottom and drop a £1 coin into the performer's pot at his feet. He looks down at me with a twinkle in his eye, but makes no other show of appreciation. Jess yanks me by the arm. "Come on," she frowns, "you'll make us late." I don't know why she's worrying, because as we make our way through the hustle and bustle of the crowds, I know we've a half hour to spare before the talk we're due to attend starts. She dragged me along to this event because she thinks the subject matter will be useful in supporting us both in our up-and-coming PhD studies at St Mary's University, Twickenham. When I returned to Carshalton after my time-travelling adventures, having fallen down the steps after the episode with George, I was relieved to discover that the train accident Mum thought Dad had been injured in wasn't the one derailed after having failed to stop in time and hitting a fallen tree. Dad was on a later train, delayed by the incident. Having heard the news on the local radio station, Mum presumed the worst. Once my iPhone acquired sufficient charge, it sprung to life and pinged non-stop with missed calls, message notifications and voicemails because Mum and my friends had been frantic in their efforts to contact me. Not knowing, of course, that I was in the 16th century, she'd phoned all my friends trying to get messages to me about Dad, which is how Rob came to relay to Professor Marshall what she thought had happened, just as I time-slipped back into the professor's office. I was so relieved Dad hadn't been on that train. However, even without it being an emergency, it didn't mean I'd go back to the Boleyns. Far from it. After sleeping with George and the mess that likely followed, I vowed that I'd never go back to Tudor England. I took too many risks, and even though I might miss him, my fear of messing up the Tudor history of this country with my stupid meddling had floored me. The professor tried to question me on numerous occasions, but I refused to be coerced into sharing anything intimate about George and me. Sometimes I wonder if Professor Marshall's allowing me to find the cipher ring, and all that followed, is a flouting of the student-teacher relationship in terms of safeguarding. But, come on, what history student in their right mind wouldn't want to time travel? It's a conversation my friends and I have had on many occasions, discussing what we might actually do. But experiencing a time slip is another thing entirely. They have ideas on what events they might like to witness, but always as a somewhat distant observer. The possibilities were endless, but for me, to experience the early modern period in real time and close up was something else, and I couldn't even hint at my reality. Though I haven't used it since, I was fortunate with the way the cipher ring and time-slipping worked for me. While I may have been away for months or years in Tudor England, it usually meant I was only absent for hours or days at 21st century time. It's mind-blowing. I didn't question things too much, in case I jinxed it, but I'm glad the cipher never sent me awry. Each time, when I didn't use the portal, I thought about when and where I wanted to go, and it took me there. And while my time in Tudorville was a fantastic experience, it can't be denied that I meddled too much. It took enormous effort and time to fix the history, and I don't want to risk messing it up again, to the detriment of our present day, not to mention Tudor times. Anyway, it doesn't matter if I want to return. I can't. I left the cipher ring in the top drawer of Professor Marshall's desk, where it's safe and out of my hands. It's not just about messing up the history. I'm afraid of returning to the Boleyns again because of what I feel for George, and because of how far things went between us. If Professor Marshall knew what happened, he'd go crazy. I have no doubt he would never give the cipher ring back to me or allow me into his office, taking away any opportunity to return to George, even if I wanted to. It's been best to keep my mouth shut about our tryst, Not to mention our being disturbed by Henry VIII himself. I blush at the thought. No, I'm not prepared to give up my innermost secrets to anyone. Not the Professor. Not Rob, either. Those two know enough, but from now on I will only share with them what I think they need to know. Jessica, while being my best friend, will never know what went on, and I'm never ever going to tell my parents anything about what happened since Professor Marshall gave me the cipher ring. All they need to understand is that I'm getting on with my studies, and that's it. Some things are best left unsaid. It's not that I can say, "By the way, Mum, Dad, I spent a few years in the 16th century where I was best friends with Anne Boleyn, made passionate love to her brother, and formed enemies at the Tudor court." No one would ever get it unless they'd seen these people from the past with their own eyes, as Professor Marshall and Robert Dryden have. Indeed, the whole scenario is better left alone. It's not the kind of experience to share with anyone because it's so sodding unbelievable. People might think I've gone mad, maybe even pack me off to the nearest psychiatrist. Besides, 4 years has passed since my last time slip. I finished my degree, completed a history MA, and am now waiting to start a PhD. I'm fortunate Professor Marshall is going to be one of my supervisors, which is great because he knows me so well already. The few times he asked why I stopped time-slipping, the only explanation I could give is that I wasted enough time interfering in the lives of the Boleyn clan, messing things up through my meddling, and that my education and career is more important than anything else. In the end, he seemed to accept my excuses. I expect he didn't push it because he didn't want to lose one of his more enthusiastic students. Even with the passing years, I still miss Anne, and at times my heart pangs for George and his sweet kisses, but for my own sake I must remain steadfast, accepting the reality that my time with them is over. Whilst my periods away from 21st century England were short, Rob didn't waste any time hooking up with Georgina, another girl on our degree course. That fizzled out soon enough, but it didn't take him long to latch onto a series of new ones, seeing me well and truly sidelined. His current fling's name is Hannah. He's not far ahead of us now, outside the National Gallery, walking hand in hand with her through the crowds. We still say hello, but that's about it. I'm fine with it, though sometimes I regret what might have been. This should be good, Jessica says, jolting me from my thoughts. Yes, I'm looking forward to it. We didn't cover much on art history during our previous courses, did we? We make our way up the stairs and into the auditorium, where the talk is taking place. As we take our seats, 2 or 3 rows from the front, I see Rob and his girlfriend taking adjoining seats on the front row. She cuddles up to him, his arm around her, and I wince inside at the public show of affection. Jessica huffs. Take no notice of them. I've heard it's not that serious anyway, and they're always arguing. Honestly, I'm not bothered. I keep the lie from my eyes and pull out a bottle of water from my bag. Did you bring a notebook? She asks as she grabs a pad and pen from her bag. I unscrew the lid and take a sip. Of course, making notes at these talks is essential. Professor Marshall has always thought so too. Probably why he encourages us to do it, right? Yeah, it's no fun trying to decipher notes made a few months after an event, she laughs. Especially if you can't keep up with what's being said, and you can't write shorthand. I pull out a biro and notebook, its cover patterned with nice flowers, one of several I purchased a few years back from Hampton Court. A woman, who I presume is the head of events, steps up onto the small stage and stands behind the podium. She taps the microphone once, then clicks on the buttons of a laptop in front of her, which brings up the first PowerPoint slide, showing the title of the talk and its speaker. The overhead lights dim, and she glances at her watch. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce our special guest speaker for this morning, Dr. Janina Ramirez, a cultural historian, broadcaster, and author based at the University of Oxford, with a passion for communicating ideas about the past, Please give her a very warm welcome." "Hello," Janina says as she walks out in front of her enthusiastic audience. Dr. Ramirez looks wonderful in a bright red dress, lace pashmina, matching scarlet lipstick, goth black shoes and tights with elegantly straightened raven hair and kohl-rimmed dark eyes. She's already mic'd up and raring to go. "Hello and welcome to this morning's lecture," she says, beaming, arms open wide as if trying to hug the audience. "I'm Janina Ramirez, an Oxford art historian, art detective and writer. Primarily, I'm a chief investigator of images." She stands in the middle of the stage, making sure there is no barrier between her and her audience, taking the relaxed approach of not using the podium. I get the impression she has memorized all she wants to say, or perhaps it's the fact that she's a bloody good visual arts historian and knows her stuff. Today, we are looking at one of my absolute favourite artists from the 16th century, Holbein. She raises both eyebrows, taking in her audience. This is exciting. She looks at a self-portrait of the artist, which has come up on the screen behind her. We are going to discuss the portrait of Holbein's family. She looks out at us again, soaking up our attention. When we think of Holbein, we think of the paintings of the ambassadors, or those depicting Henry VIII, and at least 2 of his wives, she smiles. But the image I have chosen to talk about today is the painting of his wife and their 2 oldest children. She stands sideways on as the slide changes to the image, so she can look at it as she talks. This is perhaps a counterintuitive choice, because we always think of the nobility he painted in their silks and satins while he was at the Tudor court. She changes the image to a more well-known example before bringing it back to the previous one. I have deliberately chosen this painting as it shows his wife and children as ordinary people, the kind of work he didn't do very often. It gives us a glimpse into his personal life, which we rarely get to see. This is dated 1528.